one patron, Matt McGlellan. Become a patron for early access to next episode with Cherry Bong, a Gen 2 OU YouTuber. Our conversation will be up on Patreon early next week. Finchinator is the tier leader of Smogon's OU format, a key figure in deciding the fate of specific Pokemon and other rule set implementations in the 6v6 singles format. Finchinator has had a very different approach towards his leadership of Gen 9 OU, with frequent action being taken towards new and powerful Pokemon and moves, plus a lot more community involvement with the new survey system that has been quite successful. Some of Finchinator's decisions have been controversial though, such as his advocacy for the sleep ban that ended up happening, and also the unbanning of Pokemon like Darkrai and Zamazenta, which some in the community think was a mistake. Decisions aren't entirely up to Finchinator on these things, of course, as there is a council who votes on some of these choices, and sometimes the community weighs in, with suspect votes. While I have disagreed with some of his specific opinions about Pokemon or rule set changes, I think Finchinator has overall taken a great approach with Gen 9 OU that has resulted in a pretty balanced and enjoyable metagame in its current state. Thank you for taking the time to chat today, Finchinator, and how are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Happy to be here, and thank you so much for having me.
This is the second time I've actually interviewed Finchinator folks, and the first time was pretty early on in Gen 9, I think just after Chi-Yu got banned, and now a lot has changed, of course.
Oh yeah, it's been a long time. A lot has changed. Some good, some admittedly shaky, but we're all feeling it out and improving one action at a time. So I'm happy to be back, and it's awesome to see how much your platform has grown. And of all the amazing hard workers, a lot of them are deserving, and you very much fit in that category. And it's so cool to be on this podcast and have another chance to talk to you and all of your amazing viewers.
Oh, thank you. Been working hard in the Pokemon mines. I spoke with Pinkacross recently on the podcast, who I'm sure you're familiar with. Great at Gen 9 and Gen 8 player.
I didn't watch the whole thing, but I did watch part of it. I also watched your podcast with Frieza recently, and I've been tuning in. I've talked with both of them before as well. Great people.
Yeah, it's been cool to talk to all these key figures in the community. And something I said to Pinkacross was that actually at the moment, I think I like Gen 9 OU more than I did Gen 8 and 7. Like, of all the modern recent metagames, I kind of like Gen 9 in its current state. I think that has a lot to do with the different approach to tiering they've taken, where action has been quicker this time around. Like, I remember back in Gen 8, Dracovish was running around for ages. And, like, everyone knew it was broken, but we sort of just let it happen for a while with, like, all the due process and everything. Sometimes I think you can make decisions quicker and stuff like that, and some things are a bit more divisive, less clear.
Yeah, part of it, and I was cheerleader at the start of Gen 8 and at the end, but not so much in the middle. But during the Dracovish saga, I was. Part of it was getting your footing, because at the start of Generation 8, a user by the name of ABR, who I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, was slated to be the tier leader. And he ran into some controversy revolving Sleep Clause, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. And he ultimately decided to step down just because he didn't want to be in the spotlight, in the ire of the public as much. And I was kind of thrust into the position. And I think I was too scared to make bold decisions. And I will take accountability for that, because I think part of being, a big figure in the community is being accountable for better or worse. And something like Dracovish or Arena Trap, part of it was dancing around the new DLC and home releases, which I didn't really know what to expect. And they kind of felt like I was like walking through a minefield, and they blew up right, like literally as I had a suspect ready to go. So I had to hold it back. But another part of it was just being too scared to quick ban things. So now you see this generation where I've been tier leader the whole time. And thankfully, we're in a position where I'm more confident. And maybe some people doubt that confidence, and that's all right. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I've been able to act more aggressively. I've been able to use data to back my opinions. And I've been able to have greater community outreach thanks to starting things like my Twitter account. Or I used to post my YouTube videos. Maybe one day in the near future I'll do that as well, but not right now. But just being able to reach the public and help people understand why things are happening.
I think overall it's gone well, so I appreciate your efforts, and it is kind of a thankless job in many ways. You're not getting paid or anything. It's just out of...
No, I mean, I don't do it for the thanks. I do it because I like, and I know this isn't at the forefront, but I love this community. And you're more often than not, you're probably going to see me arguing with someone, be it on Twitter, or on the forums, or whatever it may be. But I really do love this community. Like, when I was a silly 12-year-old middle schooler who was like, I don't know what to do with my summers when I'm not in school, I found Pokemon Online, and eventually that, of course, became Pokemon Showdown and Smogon. And I spent many hours playing this game, making friends on what was initially IRC or Internet Relay Chat, and then became Skype, and now Discord. Wow, I just aged myself a lot to plenty of your viewers, I'm sure. And this is in part, giving back, and in part, making this hobby that I'm sure many other people view fondly, like I have, and will continue to do so into the future, hopefully. Better for them, better quality of life, and part of it definitely took a long time for me to become the leader I am now, and I don't think I'm a perfect leader now, actually. And I appreciate you giving me credit and saying it worked out well. I actually think that there's still a ton of work to do, a ton of improvement, both for me and the metagame, but I'm very happy with how far I've come and how far the community's come, and I'm just, the vibes are good. I think I like summing things up with vibes, and the vibes are good, and they haven't always been good. So let's keep them good.
I think I might just like jump right into the deep end and ask you about sleep right away. Because that's like the most controversial thing that's happened recently in OU, where a lot of people disagreed with that decision. And I made a video about it myself.
You did.
And,
Yes, I watched the video, and I believe we spoke beforehand, which I actually really appreciated. And not so much I appreciated that we felt differently, because I don't really mind if you agree or disagree with me. There's always going to be prominent people who disagree on most things that aren't like crazy unanimous, like Ursulana Blood Moon. I think everyone agreed needed to get the hell out of here. But sleep is something more fundamental. And here's where, in my opinion, it all comes down to. Sleep Clause is something that it works. It works in the games at keeping sleep in the game while being balanced. But it's kind of arbitrary. There's no real justification or basis for it besides going all the way back 20 years to when it was in a game. There's no, sleep clause on the cartridge. There's no sleep clause in VGC. There's nothing that relates to it. And a lot of people back in Generation 7, which is where there was an initial policy review thread on it, wanted to overturn it. And back then, things like Tapu Koko and Electric Train were prominent, and Pokemon with sleep, especially early in Generation 7, weren't really around that much in the limited decks at the time. Eventually, everything came out. Sorry, Generation 8, not Generation 7, I apologize. Eventually, things came out a little more, but with that in mind, it was limited. And a lot of people were like, maybe we should do away with Sleep Clause, which actually, circling back to what I said in ABR actually removed Sleep Clause unilaterally without approval, no checks and balances. And he got so much backlash from that he stepped down, which led to me being tier leader, which is kind of funny how we're going full circle here.
And then you did it again.
I did it again.
Yeah, but not the same way, obviously.
I do think I did it differently. So we had a survey, and surveys are good, but I do think I overused surveys. Overused, not no pun intended, earlier this generation. I think surveys are more so meant to get a occasional pulse, a vibe check of the metagame, as opposed to running them every third week and saying, oh, this incremental thing changed, this new Terrablast type is used on Volcarona. Do you think it's broken now or it was a week ago? No, maybe every couple months. But on big topics like that, I like surveys because they let you know that a lot of people thought that there was something wrong with the metagame, be it Darkrai using sleep moves or sleep moves. And a lot of people thought that there was an issue because not only was Darkrai running rampant with this lead set with Sash Hypnosis, 60% of the time it gets a kill and a half, it gets a free turn, 40% of the time it might do nothing. It's just suddenly we go from playing Pokemon to slots, and then people emulated the strategy on Iron Valiant, where they used Hypnosis, Calm Mind, Hex with Terra Ghosts, and suddenly things like Slowking Galar get beaten down really badly, and it was clear that something had to be done. And I could either look into the Pokemon, which is an entirely valid perspective, and I could have banned I probably could have quick banned Darkrai at this time. I'll be full disclosure with that. And Iron Valiant probably would have had to be a long suspect, or I could have looked into Sleep and Sleep Clause. And in my opinion, there was no basis for Sleep Clause beyond tradition. And I don't really care about tradition. A lot of people do, and I respect those people. But, Sleep had already been banned in a prior generation, Black-White. Famously or infamously, you could debate the merits of it. And it also had been discussed in DPP. I don't actually know what happened in DPP, if anything. I'm not a prominent DPP player, but it was obviously a hot button topic there with Breloom, among others. And I was like, Black-White did it. It felt successful. I have a ton of people asking for action right now. And a quick ban on a Pokemon as prevalent as Darkrai would have been a hard sell And a ban of sleep also would have been a hard sell. So at that point, it wasn't a matter of who I can appease the most. It was a matter of what's the best policy decision? What's the best for the tier? People are going to be mad either way. So sometimes you got to throw that out and just say, I have support for both these options. What does my council think? What do I think? And, in terms of policy, in my opinion, it was always best to target sleep because Sleep Clause just wasn't as justified in the modern day's context. So we essentially removed Sleep Clause and banned sleep-inducing moves, which made it so that Darkrai was, at the time, balanced, and Iron Valiant became very much balanced. It's going to be a discussion that at the start of Generation 10, we're going to reevaluate. And I think each generation, is allowed to do what they want with their player base, of course. That's why we don't have uniformity between, let's say, SS and ORAS or SV and SM. There's a range of things, and that's perfectly fine. But I think that ultimate discussion that happens at the end of this generation will, be the greater rule for time to come, if you will. But for now, I thought that was the best decision. People are obviously entitled to disagree. A lot of people think we should have quick banned Darkrai. I don't really have I don't think that's objectively wrong. I just think that's favoring tradition over, a newer way of thinking. And that's fine. We all have our own priorities. The beauty of it all is that for things this hyper-specific, there's no firm priorities. It's my job as leader and my council's job as council to dictate, what is the priority, what isn't the priority. And we made a decision. Now, the one issue a lot of people had with our decision was, why didn't we leave it up to a suspect? And this is something that I will speak more firmly on because I do think there's a right and wrong on this. And I understand I'm going to butt some heads with people in your comments, and I apologize for that in advance. But I don't think the point of a suspect is to let people determine what our priorities and what our precedents are. I think the point of a suspect is if you get Rex, you're competent in the metagame, you could determine if X is broken or not broken. This is more nuanced. It's based in precedent. It's based in evaluating what our priorities are. And I don't think being able to play 30 or 40 games on the OU ladder with a good win rate gives you the qualification for that. And my tiering admin agreed with that. And, if you look at the history of suspects in current generations, there's never been one like that. So I do feel like I'm on the right side of history there, but I understand it looks kind of elitist to say that to people who maybe could have participated in a suspect but aren't on my 9-person council. So I understand there's beef. I understand how it sounds. I do think we behaved in a healthy, justifiable fashion, but I also think that it's going to be one of the most controversial topics in the history of competitive Pokemon, alongside terastallization, which, this gen has been full of it, and it's going to continue to be full of it, and that's kind of why I love it, and that's kind of why I'm happy to be in the thick of it, and that's why I'm going to own any criticism, and I'm going to take it to heart, and I'm going to respond with how I feel. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for a very detailed response there. That is where I personally took issue with it, was that it wasn't a suspect. And you said that it's like a policy issue and not a evaluation of whether something is broken or not. I guess I disagree because I view a testing of sleep as a mechanic within this specific metagame as a similar thing to like evaluating whether Terra is broken in the Terra suspect test. Like I view it's a fundamental mechanic.
Maybe, but can I counter that if you don't mind?
Sure.
So when we did the Terra suspect, the council determined the parameters. We weren't going to allow Terra on X Pokemon and not Y Pokemon. We weren't going to allow anything, for lack of a better term, to ratchet. We determined the specific parameters of it. The only viable suspect in my eyes would have been like a hyper-specific suspect that had like 3 prongs. We're like, oh, do we A, ban Darkrai, B, ban Darkrai and Iron Valiant, C, just ban Sleep, or D, do nothing? And something like that was just like so overly specific, and it felt as if it was almost not like acting in good faith in the sense of a council, because like the description of our jobs is to determine that policy and set up the framework for the community in the somewhat democratic process to make those decisions. It felt like we were almost understepping rather than overstepping, but I think a lot of people perceive that as us not giving them the chance to participate, as us actually overstepping. And that's just where my view of what a council is contrasts what maybe your view or the next guy's view. And I understand where you're coming from. I just don't know that I personally agree.
Right. So it's a slightly like awkward thing to set the parameters for in terms of what people will be voting on. And that was actually a criticism what people had during the Terra suspect, was that the options were a bit strange. Like one of them was to, I believe, you could only Terra into your stab types, which in retrospect is kind of a weird choice where that would not really solve the issue.
That's Yeah, so the initial Terra test was good in terms of timing, bad in terms of format. Bad with an asterisk. The options that needed to be there were there, but there were like 2 extra nonsense options. We were deep in the lab trying to cook, and like I take this so seriously. I really do. I work full time. I have a lot going on in life, but the amount of time I spend on my phone, like looking at Discord, chatting with people, not only in my accounts, but also like good players. And, you know, a lot of people at this time had very different opinions. You know, we had some people saying, if you ban Terra, the whole generation's ruined. It's going to be a Gen 8 clone, which I didn't dislike Gen 8, but neither here nor there. Some people saying, oh my God, if this remains in the game, you know, suddenly we're going to be playing Digimon. This isn't real. This isn't in the spirit of the game. You know, you have people that are amazing players on both sides. And then you have people like, oh, we could fix this. We could do this middle ground situation, that middle ground. And some of these got enough support both internally and in my ear that I kind of had my perception skewed. And this was a big lesson for me as a leader. I need to lead based on myself and what my council's feeling. I can't succumb to external pressure or even sometimes internal pressure if that internal pressure maybe is ill-advised. And things like Terra Captain is cool for Draft League, but it doesn't really do much in our singles OU format. Stab Terra is laughably silly. At the time, it seemed like, oh, this is cool. You know, we could at least keep it in the game. In reality, it wouldn't do anything. In fact, it might even make it worse. It might make our game less competitive. So again, I think the timing of the suspect, good. I think the fact that Terra preview and no action and outright ban were all options, the big 3, if you will, good. But everything else was me, you know, getting my feet wet, learning a lesson that I probably should have already learned, and I'll own it. I think that was a 4 out of 10 suspect when for something like that, you need to be 8 out of 10 or 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I think what ended up happening was like at first there's a binary decision of like should action be taken or not, and you vote on that. And then if you vote yes on action, you got to vote for the specific sub action you want.
Yeah,
like,
it was also like
I want Terra preview,
yeah.
I want the stab thing, or the only one Pokemon could Terra thing. So that kind of muddied the water where some people want action, but they disagree on which action.
Yeah,
so
that too. So
people voted no action, even if they wanted action, which is kind of weird.
It could have been better. Again, I'm saying it's a 4 out of 10 when it needs to be an 8 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. If I could do that again, it would be a lot more simple. But if I could do a lot of things over, I do them differently. And I'll be the first to admit that it's a learning experience. And, you know, people are going to say, oh, you know, if you're in this position, you got to be better. And I don't have a counter to that. I just got to say, I nod, I agree, you're right, I should have been better. And I think I'm better now, and I think that's been reflected. But the Terra suspect had a lot of good components, but was flawed. And there's no denying that flaw.
Yeah, I'm not holding that against you or anything. It was like very complex, and you hear a million voices yelling at you from every direction.
Yeah,
and all of them have like conviction with like, just do this and it's solved. But it's not that simple. Like some like little Jimmy knows the solution.
It's like peer pressure in high school, if you will.
Yeah. So that's all good. I mean, it turned out okay not banning Terra. I think like
it turned out better. And for the record, I thought Terra was very broken for the first month or two, even when I voted for like partial action initially. And then I kept playing, and I realized that I don't think that way anymore. It took a long time, but I don't think that way anymore. And I'm very glad it played out this way. I'm glad we didn't rush to a ban. I do think Dynamax in Generation 8 had to go. That had no place in the game whatsoever. But Terra, a better mechanic, arguably one of the best mechanics in the history of this game, and it's been crazy but exciting having it.
Yeah, when I talked to Pink Cross, I said, like, I also made a video about this. I think it's my second favorite of the generational gimmicks behind Megas. Like, I like it more than Z-Moves and, of course, Dynamax. I think Z-Moves were a bit 1D. They just, like, do a lot of damage with this. There's some cool application, but usually it's just like, all right, Landorus can do a big flying MZ or something. But Terra's more dynamic, you know? It's like, it makes Gen 9 really unique to play. It makes it stand out. Mm-hmm. And it's like a cool decision you have to make every game that is different every game, which I think is cool.
I think Generation 9 is skill intensive. I think Generation 9 is knowledge intensive in that you need to know the possibilities or potentially be in the know enough to know what like surprises to do with your Terra types and choices. I do think that there is a slight bit of variance that comes with power creep Pokemon, and that's part of why we've had a lot of bans and tiering action, and that's part of why some people hate this metagame, and I can't blame them, but I do think it's skill intensive.
Yeah, okay. And it's cool that, like, even though Terra has led to tiering action on more things, like Regieleki or something wouldn't have been banned if Terra wasn't in the game. I think, like, it's cool to lean into what makes the game unique anyway. Like, preserving Terra instead of banning it so that certain things could be allowed. makes Gen 9
Agreed.
stand out more, which is I think is cool. Like, if you don't like Terra, there's plenty of other gens and formats to play, to be honest. Anyway, I think we got sidetracked a bit. I was talking about the sleep thing.
Sure.
So part of the issue is that it's a bit difficult to come up with a nice selection of options to even vote on in the first place. And also, like, it's one of the most awkward, like, metagame situations I've seen, where sleep isn't inherently broken, but on, like, a fast guy that gets a lot out of landing the sleep, like Iron Valiant. Like, Iron Valiant with Hypnosis is stupid. Like, you can just delete something and you're so fast, you got booster energy on. It's, like, completely idiotic. But something like Breloom is fine. It's too slow. There's a million things that could stop its spore.
Yeah.
So it's annoying because, like, sleep adds something in this sense, but then, like, there's no clean solution to it. You can't just ban Hypnosis because that's, like, arbitrary. And, like, some things are fine with Hypnosis.
Darkrai is just going to use Dark Void and be 10% less accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
So Amoonguss is not broken. Breloom is not broken, and even with Spore isn't particularly good. You could go down the list of Sleep Powder users and, mostly say the same, especially in a metagame with Gliscor with Poison Heal and Goldango with blocking everything because, Goldango's that guy. But with bans, there are some principles that I adhere to, others maybe don't adhere to. In my opinion, collateral damage is very rarely a priority. So you have to make the most sound policy decision before you worry about collateral damage. So sometimes you end up having to ban a Pokemon when banning a move. Let's take Archaludon. We could have kept it, which is a cool Pokemon, and banned Electroshock, but that wouldn't have really been a sound tiering decision because then you end up with this whole slippery slope. And I'm not going to get into that, but you see my point. I ignored the collateral. In this case, I realized that the collateral would have been making something like Amoonguss, which is still viable but worse. And something like Breloom, unfortunately, is no longer very viable. And it also trickles down to lower tiers, which, again, I don't think about that collateral. I know that maybe sounds insensitive. I sound like, this like dark, evil, stall OU guy who doesn't care about your fun lower tiers. It's just the honest reality of the situation. I don't really care about collateral. Well, okay, I care about everything because I'm an overcarer, but I don't care about it as much as the sound policy decision. So then it really came down to me is the best decision to ban the Pokemon, Darkrai, Iron Valiant, with Darkrai being at the forefront of that discussion, or change the larger overarching sleep rule. And in my opinion, Sleep Clause was kind of not valid, not precedented to begin with. We don't have Freeze Clause in the game. There's no other clause like that, and you could, make a dozen different clauses that could, improve quality of life, but there's no modern day basis for it. The only justification is history. And I thought that was weak. And I thought banning multiple Pokemon from the metagame when you don't even know if that's going to stop, there could be other sleep abusers that pop up. I don't know what extent, people want to stop at risk. I thought that, especially if it was just banning Darkrai at the time and not even Iron Valiant, I thought that was going to make this issue linger. So maybe it was extreme. Maybe it was overstepping. Again, I understand people feel that way, but it felt like banning sleep at the time solved the problem without any potential chance for it squeaking out into the metagame in February, March, because this happened in January of this year, etc., while keeping the Pokemon. Now, I think a great counter to that, and you're probably going to say this, is, but preserving those Pokemon, that's preserving collateral. And I agree, but then you could also argue it kind of goes both ways. Like, banning the Pokemon means, like, sleep moves are staying as collateral. Like, at that point, you're kind of making micro decisions as opposed to looking at it at a larger level. So it's not something that I can say I did 100% correctly, but I do think what I did was justified.
Yeah, I guess it's subjective, and every decision is going to have some sort of collateral damage or some option is lost.
Yes. And yeah, I think you're right in what you said, in that there's possibility for a multi-pronged test. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying that, most variants of that test don't really fit the mold of a suspect. So, there might have been a more democratic middle ground situation, but much in tune with how I've handled this metagame. I saw nonsense. I saw a solution to it that was sound, and I acted on it. And yeah, it did lead, maybe it was cutting a slight corner. Maybe it did make some people feel a little sad that they lost this otherwise usable strategy with Breloom or Amoonguss or, again, whatever sleep powder user. But I stand by it. I'd do it again. I'd probably take a little longer doing it, though, because I do think that the pace at which we did it was catered more towards the Smogon Premier League at the time. And if we waited another week, we probably could have done it in a bit more of a PR-friendly way. After that ban, there was a ton of backlash. Rightfully so to an extent. I mean, I didn't appreciate it when a guy found my real life phone number and left me a voicemail in the middle of the night, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous.
But oh, it's so funny looking back at it now though. Like being removed, that's in the lore of Generation 9. That's cool. Not really cool, but you know what I mean. But I do think people had a right to. So I made another post a couple days after the ban, going into the detail, like the process, why we did this. And if I had that all in my initial decision, I think it would have maybe not made a difference to 9 out of 10 people, but the 1 out of 10 people who are in the weeds on Smogon and interested in like the justification, I think they would at least resonated with them. And those are the people that I connect with the most on the forums, on Twitter, on the ladder, or Pokemon Showdown, the OU room. And I feel like I let those people down. So while I think the ultimate decision I don't regret, I do think the way in which I did it, again, it could have used improvement. And I think it was better than a couple past ones, but again, we're getting like 4 out of 10. Maybe this one was a 5 or a 6 out of 10. We're getting better. I'm learning from my mistakes. But I'll be the first to admit, it's rough around the edges. And I'm very proud of this decision, but I also, look back at it and think kind of wish I didn't succumb to the pressure of a strict timeline. So win some, lose some.
Yeah, and in my video about it, I said, like, I don't necessarily think this is the wrong decision or that it's going to result in a worse metagame or that another decision would result in a better metagame. But yeah, my disagreement with that at the time was just the fact it wasn't a suspect. But, you raise an interesting point where that may have muddied the waters, and it was a difficult thing to actually create a ruling on in terms of what the options are. Another thing I disagree with you on, you say you don't value the historical precedent of sleep clause existing for so many years in OU. I personally do value that. Like, that's just, like, even if it is arbitrary. Like, it is arbitrary. The games do not have a sleep clause in it. But at the end of the day, we have played with a sleep clause for, like, ages, and it's just, like, fundamental to the game, like sleep sacking and everything. So I think if you change that, it's changing a mechanic in a similar way to, like, banning a fundamental mechanic like Dynamax. Like, even though it's not an official mechanic in the game, it is still... Sleep clause is a tiering ruling, but it does affect how you play. It affects your resource management and, like, the dynamics and everything.
Okay, that's a good point. And I don't have a way to disprove that those two things being equated to each other. I view generational mechanics in their own tier because we're presented with a new one on a silver platter every generation, it feels like Generation 8 Dynamax, Generation 7 Z moves, which I agree with you, by the way, they're kind of Generation 6 Megas, my favorite as well. But again, getting back to the topic, we've had one every generation. You could even say Generation 5 had weather. I'm not really sure it's the same, but you know what I mean. I view that as silver platter. We got to give this the white glove treatment. We can't quick ban a generational mechanic. Dynamax was always going to be a suspect, even though it got like 88% ban. That's just a foregone conclusion. Sleep has been a constant in every generation. I didn't view it the same way. I think that there's no right or wrong because there's nothing codified. And I actually have some beef with Smogon. And I'm saying this is one of the bigger faces of Smogon. Smogon needs to codify more things. We need something we could resort to and say, this is the priority, not this. And there's countless different things it could be done for. It's never going to be perfect, but if those priorities are written out, not only for cheerleaders, but for people discussing it, then that will make it easier. That'll give us something to point to. It's never been done. I'm not sure if it ever will be. So sometimes we have to make up decisions and justification based on our perception, and how I perceive things is different than how you perceive things. Does that make you wrong? No. Does that make me wrong? Depends who you ask, but I mean, in my opinion, no. So it's almost like, I don't want to say governmental-like, because I don't want to talk about the government on a Pokemon podcast ever. But it's almost like, you never think of this until it comes up and it's right in the front of you and you're like, oh, I have to make this grand decision and it boils down to this. And then you're like, I wish I had something I can consult. And I didn't. So we went with how we perceived it. And, for better or worse, it's here. I don't think I see anyone complaining about sleep in the modern day, thankfully. It's kind of been like a relief. Amoonguss has actually bounced back in OU well because Superior and especially Ogerpon have been really good. I'm actually like, every time I see an Amoonguss, like my eyes like perk up like, okay, I didn't kill it completely.
Same thing happened in Gen 5, right? Like sleep got banned and then Amoonguss sucks now, but then it actually comes up sometimes. Just regen is good.
It's got a cool kit. Even Breloom is still pretty good.
Yeah.
So it's refreshing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, like, I don't care too much. It's just like semantic and like maybe it could have been done more cleanly slightly. But at the end of the day, I think it has improved the meta to ban sleep, probably. Like, it was a clean way to handle the Darkrai problem that was creating annoying situations. So, yeah, all good, I guess. Like we can argue about.
Live and learn.
Like I'm really just playing devil's advocate kind of, or
But that's fun. I love these conversations. Like, I am a policy junkie. I've done this for years. When I was 14 years old, I ran Never Used on Pokemon Online. It's been a hot minute, so I don't really mind it. In fact, I encourage people to go out there and find things that I've said or decisions I've made and say, hey, I think you could do this better, or hey, this is another perspective, because that's how I improve. So I think it's all good. I appreciate it.
I mostly play old gens, and the tiering in old gens is very different, where it's not as community involved, and they just do stuff, like sometimes. Like Gen 3 OU implemented a freeze clause. There was no vote, or like, does anyone agree with this? It's just like, put a freeze clause in. Jirachi's stupid. It's got 20% Ice Punch freeze. Just chuck it, just throw it in. It improved the game. No one complained. So, like, that's a bit different.
Very different. Can I ask you a question real quickly?
Yeah, sure.
What do you feel about the Advanced Council? Because I think a lot of people hate their guts, and I'm not really sure how justified it is, because I like every single person on Net Council, and I think they're trying their hardest. But I think it's very hard to tier something. The older it gets, I think the harder it gets.
Overall, I like them. Like, because there's been, like, Gen 3 is a pretty stable metagame. It's different to other gen, where you're changing little things. It's like, usually it's around Baton Pass is the one game-breaking thing, and people keep, like, solving Baton Pass in unique ways, where Mr. Mime was running around because it has soundproof on it, so it can't get roared out.
Yep.
So it would create this infinite Baton Pass chain with, like, you taunt, can't get roared, you go Vaporeon, get every boost in the world, and then go to, like, Octillery.
It made testing for Classic my worst nightmare a couple years back.
Oh yeah. So they like every time problems propped up with that, they're pretty quick to act. Where they banned, they did a suspect that ended up banning multiple sources of boosts, because it's important to preserve Baton Pass in that game because there's no other form of pivoting, and some forms of stat passing are also balanced. It's kind of unique. Like Baton Pass is banned in most gens, but in Gen 3 you can pass.
You could never ban it in Gen 3. Now it would like make things like, Celebi, Zapdos, I'm sure there are others, play fundamentally differently, Vaporeon, etc.
Yeah, like Carmine Pass Celebi is cool, and it enables interesting Pokemon. Like Carmine Pass to Gengar is cool, or Carmine Pass to Kingdra can be an interesting win con.
Definitely.
But yeah, they're quick to act on that stuff, and like it keeps coming back in some way, and then they respond to it again. Like they ended up banning Soundproof, the ability, because that just kept enabling Baton Pass chains.
That's kind of funny, but also I think that's probably the right decision.
Yeah, because like it's funny because it's not broken in modern gens at all, but in Gen 3 nothing gets Whirlwind except Skarmory and Hariyama. So like it just made you need to run Skarmory even more than you already did. Which just kind of made the metagame worse, and like you can't use anything interesting on ladder for the because of the Baton Pass matchup, which is stupid.
Yeah, and you run into it like every third game, and at the only time you bring the team without it, it's like a nightmare.
And it's dumb because like Whirlwind just beats it, and it's not fun. Like they just thud, and nothing can be done. But
yeah.
So yeah, and then there was also Cacturne. They just banned Sandvale, which has been done in other gens. I think Gen 4, like 4 and 5, it's banned too.
Yep, it saved my guy Garchomp.
Yep. So, but recently they've been under fire because of, funnily enough, Sand Attack is like a weird problem in Gen 3. The accuracy lowering move. Because Ninjask can use it and just like fish for good outcomes, basically. And Ninjask is the guy who passes speed.
Game roulette.
Yeah, so like sometimes it's really dumb where they sand attack you and you try to roar them out, which is usually the counterplay to stat pass, and you just miss roar, because in Gen 3 you can miss roar, and it's just like stupid because you can't do anything. A lot of people think like just ban it the way you implemented freeze clause. They also banned Swagger recently, just a quick ban. So why not just ban accuracy drop moves too? There's not much lost. There's like some application where so like in Gen 3, there's a lot of last Pokemon Suicune win condition where you can't roar it out. So a way to counterplay that is by accuracy dropping it, because it can't switch out either. That's some application, but like that's so specific. And
it's not, again, it's collateral. Yeah.
But they haven't done anything on that. And a lot of people just think they should do it because like, there's just these cheesy people who use Ninjask Sand Attack on the ladder. But, overall, I like them. Sometimes, like on certain things, I guess I disagree, but that's fine, I guess.
They're trying their best.
Yeah. And it's a thankless job. It's like the volunteer work, so I'm not too mad as well. It's all good.
That's how I feel too.
And Super Epic Ampharos is on the council, who's a friend of mine who I think...
Yeah, I actually want to watch that one. She was my teammate in a tournament last year. Oh my god, I'm old. Just think about all the tournaments I've been. And she's a very nice person, and she's a very creative player. Really, really smart.
Yeah, one of the legends of Smogon, in my opinion. And she's the one who banned Swagger, or like got that discussion going. And
Yep.
then there's like McMagan on the council who I think I just agree with him on everything pretty much. Every time he shares an opinion
I
on
love
like
McMagan.
policy or whatever, I'm like, yeah, you're right. I agree.
McMegan is one of the people who inspired me to take my contributions from Pokemon Online to Smogon. I've been a teammate with him a lot. He is one of the better people out there, and obviously one of the all-time greats as a player too. Big fan.
Yeah, absolute legend for sure. Speaking of old gen tiering, you're on the Gen 5 council, aren't you? That's
Yeah, I'm not sure how much longer, but I've kind of been the figurehead for that generation. Truthfully, my passion for Black and White comes and goes. I think I identify more with SVOU. I played it in SPL. I'm gonna probably play it next SPL. But I do still have, I'm still one of, alongside a couple others, the faces of Black White. So, if you have any questions or your viewers have any questions about that, I'm all game. I'm all ears. I'm all mouth.
so recently there
something
was
to
the Reuniclus suspect,
Mhm.
and the result was do not ban pretty overwhelmingly. What do you think of
Yep.
that? What do you think of Reuniclus? Do you think it's broken?
I voted do not ban. I think that it is one of those cases where it's a Pokemon that requires a lot of resources to counter, but that amount of resources is not disproportionate with metagame norms. You have other Pokemon in the metagame that, require similar or even greater resources that are, similarly like entangled in identity